Hey, folks, you are listening to the Jobs Podcast. I am your host, Tim Hendricks. Your time is valuable. I'm not going to waste it, so let's get right to the interview. Today, we have Jason with us. He is a HotShot trucker and an expert on all things logistics and trucking and all that kind of stuff. So, Jason, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm grateful for being here.
Yeah, so let's start off like we always do. Give us a little bit of history on Jason, where you were born, your upbringing, and we'll start into your education.
Yeah, so I was born in a small town called Iola, Kansas, out there in I guess it would be considered southwestern Kansas. No,
Okay.
southeastern Kansas. Southwestern Missouri is where I moved to. So southeastern Kansas is where I grew up. I was born,
Hmm.
and I was born in what I would consider, or what I considered back then, was a normal family. Later on, I started to realize that, we there's definitely some issues there. My father, he struggled pretty hard with drug issues, and my mom, me, and my sister. My mom left my father when we were about 12, and we ended up moving. She was remarried, and we moved to Joplin, Missouri. If anybody
Hmm.
knows where that's at, good old Joplin.
Yeah,
Um, and yeah, my stepfather, he was definitely he was better. We grew up pretty poor when I was living with my father, right? He was a plumber, had his own business, but with his struggles and stuff, we didn't really have much. But my stepfather, he was a little bit better well off, so we lived, more of a middle class life during that time, but he struggled with alcoholism, and once I started getting more to my teen years, we started having more of issues, right? So I actually ended up moving to Fairbanks, Alaska when I was about 16. Live with my uncle, my grandparents. My grandpa's in the military. He got stationed up in Alaska, retired there, and never left. And so I ended up moving to Alaska, finished high school up there, and then yeah, went off to college.
man, that was a big jump moving from Missouri to Alaska.
Yeah, it was definitely different, you know. I really enjoyed kind of opportunity as a kid. That was what really pushed me. Whether that was with sports or with just having different opportunity, be able to do different things. I always had some sort of a hobby, and I was kind of jumping from hobby to hobby as I learned more. I grew up. I'm 28 right now, so
Hmm.
when I was about 12, I believe, or maybe a little bit younger, is when YouTube was first really taking off, and then
Yeah,
after that, we, just watching lots of YouTube videos, learning a lot of different things. And then, when the opportunity came to go to Alaska, I was starting to have issues with my stepfather, as I was growing up. Then I was like, let's do it. I would love to go to Alaska and live with my uncle. And, it was a great time, but definitely a big change. But,
sure.
it was a good time though, for sure.
So you graduated from high school up in Alaska, and then what?
So after high school, I ended up going to Southern Utah. I went to college for. I only went to college for 1 year. I actually went down there and I wrestled. They had a wrestling team. I wrestled through high school and went down to college for 1 year. And then, well, down there in Southern Utah, I um, I actually became Mormon, and I went and served a 2-year mission in Mexico. About a year after I joined the church, I did 1 year in college, and then I went to Mexico for 2 years as a missionary. So that was kind of, from 18 to 21. And this would have been, I think I left in 2017, came back in 2019. I was 19 years old when I left and went to Mexico. I was 21 when I came back. And after that, I moved back to Missouri. I lived at my with my sister back in Joplin. So that's kind of what those 3 years looked like.
Boy, you were a busy young man.
I mean, yeah, I mean, a lot of it was just opportunity, right? Like,
Sure.
when I went to college, for example, you're kind of in high school and everyone's pushing you to go to college, right? And that's what you
Hmm.
think is the right thing to do. And I think it is the right thing to do for a lot of people. But you almost get overwhelmed trying to pick what you want to do, you know? It's like,
Yeah.
what I'm studying is the most important thing in the world. And if I'm going to spend this time studying it, then this is what I'm gonna do for the rest of my life. And I was always about business. Kind of growing up with my father, he had his own business, but man, I never really saw anything. I just knew that he was a plumber and he had his own company. But I really wanted to own my own business, and I wanted to learn about business. I wanted to be a part of business. And so that's why I went and studied. But about a year into college, I realized, just the ample amount of information that I could receive outside of college, and I wasn't that good of a student. It was hard for me to. I didn't want to take a class that I didn't want to take, basically, right? I
Yeah.
didn't see the value so much in getting a diploma. And now looking back, I think a little bit different about it. Getting a degree, I think there's a lot of value, especially when you're that young, just to go through college and not staple yourself anywhere, but just finish, and get that education and get that those opportunities that it'll provide you. But back then, I was kind of like, I'm going to start my own business. Like, I don't really need to do this anymore. And then the opportunity came to go on a mission, and so I ended up taking that. Right.
Yeah, you were wanting to get to the meat of the issue as far as business and not waste time with, art classes and all that kind of stuff that really didn't seem important.
Yeah, it was like, math class. I mean, it was just all sorts of stuff. It's like, you know, I I wouldn't call myself a rebel, but I was just kind of cynical sometimes when it came to some of the professors and some of the classes. I was just like, why am I even here right now? Like, I went
Yeah.
through high school. Like, high school's one thing, right? Like, you finish high school, you
Mhm.
take the classes you need to take. But it's like right now, my parents aren't forcing me to go to college. Like, they're not, no one's forcing me to be here right now. I don't want to be here right now. These classes, I don't see any value. And that was more just being, 19 years old, right? Or 18 years
Yeah.
old. That's just how that is.
And you got to pay for
And
college too.
yeah, you're in college and it's like I don't like some of these classes I really do enjoy. Like I was in a radio, I was part of the radio in college and I really enjoyed that. And some of the business classes I really enjoyed, and more of my communication classes, my debate classes, like I enjoyed those. But I was like, can I not just take these classes and gain this knowledge and not have to waste my time doing this other stuff? And I mean, obviously it doesn't really work out like that.
Well, yeah. College is a good fit for some folks, but not for everybody. I'm quickly learning with this podcast, but where did the hotshot trucking and the logistics sort of creep into your life?
Yeah, I'll run you through it. So basically after I got off the mission, I moved to Missouri and I got a job selling cars and I was 21 and I made good money selling cars, but I've always, I have always been more of a wanting to provide people with information, right? I think that's always been, helping people learn something. I've always wanted to learn things and I want to help people learn things, right? And I think, you know, one reason that people don't progress is because they don't have the information necessary. And we're so blessed in today's world to have so much information, at our fingertips, but sometimes that
Yeah.
makes us even lazier, right? It's
Yeah.
too easy.
Yeah.
And people take advantage of that and they scam people. But anyways, so when I was selling cars, I really enjoyed helping, first time car buyers, younger kids that were my age and say, "Hey, this is what your payment looks like. This is a car. This is how an APR works. This is how like your payments are. This is what you should do, refinance, get a better deal, this, that, and the other." But sometimes I was put into situations where I felt like it was a moral issue with me, where I had to be almost dishonest, and so I stopped selling cars, but I was making good money for my age. And then over the summers, I would go back up to Alaska because a good friend of mine had a pest control business. And they would spray for mosquitoes, and so I would go and we would go door to door. We would, I would run a team of guys and we'd spray, and it was a great time being up there in Alaska over the summer. It's beautiful and working and making good money. After the last year that I did that, this probably would have been 2020. The summer of 2020 was the last year I did that. I was about to say 2023, and I'm like, we're in 2025. This is a while ago. Doesn't
Yeah.
seem like a while ago, but
Yeah.
2020, last summer, I did that. The guy who owned that company, one of my best friends, he's like, we should start a company. We should do something. And I remember going back to Missouri and being in church one day and talking to a friend of mine because I would recruit people to go to Alaska. Whether they were technicians, say, hey, come live in Alaska, or salesmen, right? And I said, what are you doing this summer? You should come to Alaska. We'll work. He's like, well, I actually, bought a semi truck and I have a semi truck on the road. And I was like, no, you don't. And he's like, yeah, I do. And so I was like, well, I asked him all these questions about it. And I was like, how much money are you making a week, with your one truck? And he says, well, I clear about $1,000, profit. And I said, we can do this. And so then I called my friend, like literally 30 minutes later. and I said, "Hey, man, let's look at getting a semi truck, getting a trucking company, getting trucks on the road." And so that kind of started, from the first step to where we are now. Um, but once that we kind of dug into it, and we learned everything off YouTube. Like I learned all the information off YouTube. I found a couple guys that had obviously been in it and had more information than me. And what had happened was, and I had sold cars, so I understood, what it took to buy a car. I was like, we both got good credit scores, we have a good down payment, we should be able to buy a semi truck. But we learned quickly that, if you don't have a CDL and you don't already have a company, the banks aren't going to loan you money on a semi truck.
Yeah.
And so we kind of were like the wind was taken out of our sail, at that point, which this happens a lot in business. Anybody who's listening, this happens all the time. Your wind is going to be taken out of your sails multiple times during the course of whatever business you're running. Uh, so we kind of put it on a back burner. And then I saw a video about HotShot trucking. And I was like, anybody can buy an F-350, right? As long as you can go to a Ford dealership, finance an F-350 fairly easy compared to buying a semi truck. So then we started digging into hotshot trucking really hard. Ended up buying a truck, a trailer. We activated our trucking authority, and I started making videos on YouTube about it, which is where I started my YouTube channel. And this would have been October of 2020, right when we first started.
What does I don't even know what a semi truck goes for nowadays. I mean, I'm sure you can buy used, but if you're buying new, what are we talking about ballpark to get your
Oh
foot
yeah,
in
if
the
you're
door?
buying a brand new semi truck, you're talking probably 170,000 for
Shoo.
and that's more for a fleet version, right? Like so they have different semi trucks for different things, right? So
Hmm.
a lot of guys who are owner operators, they want more of a more powerful truck, a more owner operator friendly truck, a nicer looking truck. But if you're running a company like one of these major trucking companies like Prime or JB Hunt or insert name here, they're going to have the fleet versions of trucks, which are basically your automatic basic bone trucks that are 450 horsepower. And they're hard to break, right? So you can put a driver in there. They have a lot of safety systems on them,
Ah, okay.
and that's what you'd get brand new for like 170. But there are beautiful semi trucks go for 230, 240,000. But the thing is with a semi truck is, which we don't have to get too deep into it, but they, they're hard to resell, number one, unless it's like a truck that somebody wants. So if it's like one of those owner operator trucks, you can get your money back out of it because people want that. But they decrease in value very quick because they're so expensive to fix, right?
Okay.
And so, you can have a semi truck. You can buy a used semi truck that has 350,000, 400,000 miles on it, anywhere from 40 or 50,000. And you might say, oh, that's a ton of miles. But these trucks are built to go a million miles, right?
Right.
Obviously, there's lots of repairs that go into them during that time. But, a semi truck with 500,000 miles still has a good amount of life left on it, right? Um, but once a truck, especially if you buy a truck that's not that sought after, right? People don't like the engine that's in it. They don't like the transmission. They don't like the maker, whatever the case may be. Once it gets to about 600, 700,000 miles, a lot of times they become worthless, because people don't want to buy it. Number one, or they know that there's about to be a big repair that's going to need to be done on it, and they know that they won't be able to get their money back out of the truck if they repair it. Now, all of that being said, there are a lot of trucks out there that are very sought after. There's motors that are very sought after, and people will buy the truck, rebuild the motor, and they'll be able to get all the money back out of it because people want that, right? So there's all sorts of flavors of semi trucks out there.
Is it
There
is it a lot like the Ford Chevy Dodge debate where everybody kind of has their favorite and they think that's the best?
Definitely, that definitely plays a part.
Okay.
And a lot of it is actual performance too, because you'll have, and this is kind of what makes a difference, right? For example, here you'll have like an international semi truck, right? International, in that semi truck, you have the international motor. Now, international does not have the best track record, and the parts are very expensive, and the dealership rates to fix anything are very expensive, right? So that all goes into play, right? So like you might have a manufacturer who is just like trying to really take advantage of the customer by making all of their parts exclusive. It's like John Deere, for example. Like John
Ah,
Deere is the
yeah.
only person allowed to fix John Deere, right?
Right. Right.
That might turn you away from it, you know?
Mhm.
So international, for example, their parts are going to be very exclusive and they're going to be expensive. Now, on the other hand, you know, if you might buy an international truck that has a Cummins engine in it, right? Or somebody engine swapped it. That truck is going to be more desirable because of that engine, right? And the Cummins are more, you know, you can find parts a lot more accessibility of parts. They're a lot more cost effective. And so when you're buying a semi truck, you have to take all of that into consideration, right? And it's like this truck might be cheap and it might have lower miles, but why is that? Well, the reason is because when that like for example, I have an International Pro Star and it's at 750,000 miles. I could put all the money into rebuilding that engine and get more life out of it, but as that truck sits, it's worth 15 grand. If I
Hmm.
rebuilt the engine for $30,000, it'd probably be worth $22,000.
Oh my goodness. So
So
not
it's
worth
just
it at
not worth
all.
it, right? Because
Yeah.
nobody wants it, you know?
Mhm.
But there are other trucks, like I said, that it is worth it, and you'll see trucks from the late '90s that have a motor in them that being rebuilt twice because people just love the motor, they love the truck, they wanna keep it on the road, and it's worth money, right?
I remember my father-in-law, it's a number of years ago when he retired from farming. Before he completely retired, he delivered irrigation pivots from Nebraska all over up into Canada and all over. And I want to say he had a Peterbilt. It was a 2006, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember when he sold that thing because it was pre-emissions and he
Oh,
had
yeah, it goes
taken
for good
such,
money.
yeah, he was pretty happy with what he got out of it, even though it had, I think he had over 1 million miles on his, but I'm not, don't quote me on that. But he got a lot of interest because it didn't have all the EPA stuff on it.
Oh, for sure. And that's another thing too. The depth systems have come into play
Yeah.
that we need now. They're expensive, they break a lot, and they cause a lot of issues.
Hmm.
And that's why a lot of people like the older. Like you could have what's called a glider kit, which you can cut me off whenever. I can talk about trucks all day, but
Oh, no, please do. I find it interesting.
for sure, you can have what's called a glider kit. They don't really make them anymore, but it would be a brand new truck with a 1999 motor in it.
Really?
Because then they don't need the def system, number 1, and they don't have to keep electronic logs because there's no
Oh.
computer. There's quote unquote "no computer" in the truck. Um, so there's a lot of benefits there. Like my father-in-law, for example, I live out now in Mountain Grove, Missouri, out in the
Hmm.
middle kind of the Ozarks.
Yeah.
And my father-in-law owns a bumper to bumper and he does farming. And he has like a 1996 Peterbilt. I think it's a 379, don't quote me on it, with a cat engine in it, which those engines are it's a high powered, 650 horsepower, and it probably has 1.4, $1.5 million on the or not $1 million, million miles on the truck, right? But that engine, has been rebuilt, and that truck right there, and it's an old truck, is worth probably 55, $60,000.
Wow.
But you could have, a run of the mill fleet semi truck like International Pro Star that has 600 or 500,000 miles on it, or maybe even less than that, 450, and you can only get 20 grand out of it or 21,000. So it's very like the market is you have to know what you're doing, especially if you're trying to buy semi trucks or sell semi trucks or just do anything in that market. You have to understand the equipment and the value of it. Same with trailers. Same with trailers. I mean, dry van trailers, they're a dime a dozen. They're cheap, but the problem is with a dry van, a lot of brokers, the people you get your loads from, they won't use older dry vans because either their customer has a request or their customer like what you're hauling in it, they can't let it get wet or they don't want it to get dirty or whatever the case may be because you're hauling food grade a lot of
Mm.
times.
Okay.
So once a dry van's 10, 15 years old, it's basically worthless. I mean, they're worth a little bit of money, maybe a couple grand, 5 grand, 10 grand, but nothing like what a new dry van would go for.
I don't even know what that would be new.
I mean, it depends. I would say like a couple years old, in good condition, you can probably find one for about 30,000. That's nice. Brand new, I think they're roughly about 60 or so. But I deal more in flatbed and step deck stuff.
Okay.
So, like a step deck trailer or flatbed trailer, I mean, those, they hold their value a lot better. Because, you can have a flatbed trailer from the late '90s that, you've done work to, and it's still going to hold good value and still can be used to haul freight, and you're never going to be questioned ever about it, right?
Trailers are kind of funny because I'm talking like flatbed or utility type trailers. They never seem to lose their value, or if they do, it's not very much. They do
No, they
seem to,
don't. Yeah,
yeah.
they don't because you can make good money with them and they're necessary. Like I bought a 2013 utility 48-foot flatbed, and I bought it like 3 years ago for about 20 grand during the pandemic and stuff. And now today I could probably get 14 or 15,000 out of it if I needed to sell it. I mean, like that's in a trucking world, like that's not a bad loss in value. But I mean, I can also rent that trailer monthly for close to $1,000.
Wow.
And people need trailers, man. Like there's a lot of people that can't get equipment that want a truck. And it's like if you have the equipment, which I wouldn't do this with semi trucks because anything can go wrong with a semi truck at any time, right? But the trailer side of things, trailers are pretty simple. Obviously stuff can go wrong with them, but you know, they're simple, they're tough, and durable if you buy the right ones. Their parts are very universal if you buy the right trailer. Some trailers not so much, but typically they're cheaper to fix. They're good pieces of equipment. The truck is what I think can cause you the most issues if you don't know what you're doing.
A lot of the trucks nowadays, and again, I'm going to insert my personal opinion as someone who does not drive a truck for a living, so I want the context to be clear there. I see some of these semis on the road that they look like they've got an apartment as far as the sleeper on the back of these things.
Oh yeah.
And I can only imagine that those cost as much as a house.
Oh, for
But
sure. I mean, it depends on what you're looking at, right? Like you'll see like the really extended ones that have like almost an RV on them, basically.
yeah,
That can brand new. That's probably $350,000 for the truck.
man.
But you have people there like that. A person who owns that truck is somebody who's a retired trucker, basically, who's
Hmm.
not quote unquote retired, but they want to keep trucking. They want to bring their wife and their family with them. They want to travel, you know?
Yeah.
And that's who would have that truck. And I mean, if you're somebody who's like, I've trucked for 25 years, I'm ready to retire, but I want to keep going, but I want to bring my wife on the road with me. I want to bring, I want to travel a lot. Like that's what you would own, you know?
Okay.
So instead of going out and buying an RV and doing it with your wife when you're that age, you just buy a semi truck that's like that.
Well, I mean, it makes
And
sense because you can make money while you're traveling, so you kind of have the best of both worlds there.
oh yeah, you can make money while you're traveling. That's what you see more there. And sometimes you'll have guys who are just been with a company so long, and the company kind of blesses them with one of those, a
Mm,
major company, as they want to retire. And I say retire, but you know what I mean, right? More
slowed it.
dedicate themselves to traveling, but they still want
Yeah.
to be able to truck. They still want
Yeah.
to move freight, and make money.
Downshifting a little bit.
Yeah, they're not just like they want their wife to be with them. They want their dogs to be with them.
Yeah.
They want to be able to live on the road, let go of their house.
So the hot shot side of things, that's your F350, 450. I don't know if 550 is in that
Yep,
mix, but
550, yeah.
okay. What do they have anything higher than that? Do they go up like a 6 or 750 or
Well, hot shot's kind of the term hot shot actually originated with the oil fields. What would happen is they would have something would break down on an oil field, and they would need parts delivered, at any time at night, any time during the day, but they wouldn't need like a whole semi truck to deliver it, right?
okay.
So they started hot shots, and a hot shot truck can be. I mean, you have guys that do box trucks. They consider that a hot shot. A hot shot in general is just a truck that delivers freight like less than a truckload, less than a full truck size freight, at a fast pace. That's basically what it is, right? But we don't. It's not so much that anymore, as much as it is people figuring out that there's a niche in trucking for a gooseneck trailer to haul about 10,000 pounds. You get paid a little bit less in general than a semi truck, but there's a way lower point of entry than having to get into your own semi truck. And so a lot of people get into hot shot, right? Because you can even do non CDL hot shot, meaning you don't have a commercial license. You'll see guys that pull a 40-foot gooseneck trailer with an F250, and they haul like 9,000 pounds. I don't promote that. That's how we started back in the day, actually, but I don't promote that as much as like a successful way to do hotshot or get into trucking, and that's from my own experience and from helping lots of trucking companies over the last years. Just because you are so what's the word I'm looking for? Limited. That's what you're so limited on the freight that you can haul and limited on the money you can make, right? I have, my where my trucking company is today, we've moved to just full size semi trucks because of how much freight there is out there, right? But yeah, hot shot, you can have an F650 do hot shot. There's some people that have single axle semi trucks, which there's a good niche there that pull gooseneck trailers or pull 53-foot step decks. Um, there's a lot of niches within it, and there's a lot of benefits to it. One benefit is that how low the trailer is to the ground. Most cases you have a height, federal height requirements, like you have to be under 13.6 tall. That's kind of the rule. That being said, you can get permits and go taller, but there'll be some times where a broker has, a load that's 10 foot tall. He can't put that 10-foot tall load on a normal step deck because it'd be over 13.6 from the ground. But if it weighs under, 18,000 pounds, or if it only weighs 10,000 pounds, he can put that on a gooseneck trailer, as long as, it fits on the trailer, obviously. It's not oversized. Uh, and he can get that hauled. So there are benefits to it, but obviously you are going to be limited with the amount of weight that you can move as well.
Is the height because of the overpasses? Is that what that's there for?
It's all sorts of stuff. I mean, really, the overpasses aren't going to be your problem. Like, I mean, on the interstate, it's going to be mostly, um, electrical lines. For example, you're delivering in some small town, middle of nowhere. You don't know how tall their electrical lines are. You don't know, how their overpasses are just going over their normal roads. You have to have a trucking GPS. That's like a number one necessity, because you get into a town and like all of a sudden you roll up under this street and there's like a 11-foot tall 11-foot tall overpass or whatever the case may be, and you can't fit under it, right? And so the 13.6 is kind of like where that's like the height as tall as you can be without permits, and that will kind of keep you safe in a lot of different situations. And that's kind of more going over, the interstates or going to big cities. Well,
Hmm.
mostly everything's gonna be fine, but a lot of these smaller towns, you have to be on top of it because you can definitely put yourself in a bind.
You just said something that I don't know if I understood the term. You said a truck GPS. Are you meaning just a GPS in general, or do they have specific ones for trucking?
So they have specific ones that will they do all sorts of things for truck drivers. Number one is they'll tell you where all the way stations are. They'll
Okay.
tell you where low overpasses are, and they'll give you a truck route. So the truck routes, because obviously let's say you go to New York, there's a lot of roads you can't drive down legally, right? Or other
Right.
places. It says this is not a truck route. You've always seen the sign, this is not a truck route. So these truck GPSs, as long as they're updated, should have that information. They should take you a route that A, you're going to be able to legally go, and B, you're going to be able to safely go.
Okay.
And that's what a truck GPS is going to do for you. And they also show you, where big truck stops are. They show you, way stations. They show you all sorts of stuff, right? But it is a GPS that is made for truckers, to keep them safe, to keep them legal, and take them routes that they can actually go. Because I mean, you're seven even with a hot shot, you're 70 feet long, right? And if you can get yourself in tight situations very quickly, if you don't have a GPS, you're not going the route it takes you, and you don't know what you're doing. Um, and I mean, we've all been in big cities. I mean, just imagine. I drive a Prius. Imagine driving a big old truck in a big city. Sometimes my Prius, I'm having trouble. So it's like, yeah, it makes a big difference.
That's got to be odd going from a semi truck to a Prius back and forth. I mean, that's just a
So I
drastic.
actually, I actually don't drive at all.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't drive at all. I've always just been the owner of the company,
Okay.
and build the system for the truck drivers. One thing we do
Hmm.
is I have my own semi truck, but I would lease on owner operators, people that own their own equipment and they want
Oh,
to drive, and
okay.
then they would run under the system that I've created.
Okay.
So
Now,
yeah.
you had said a bit ago about the weight and the cargo that a hotshot person would typically carry. I think I already know the answer to this question, but the variety is just probably off the charts as far as the types of cargo, correct?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff. So the way that people get loads, uh, we have third party companies are called load boards, and so The way this works is I provide a truck, I have the truck, and then a broker, just like any sort of broker, they
Hmm.
have the loads, right? They work with customers, they put the loads on a load board. I call them, I provide a truck, and I mean, that freight could be literally anything, all sorts of different things that freight could be. And a lot of times, especially with HotShot, I call a broker and they're telling me information. I'm like, well, how long is it? How tall is it? How much does it weigh? How wide is it? And, I have to have that information because, you can put yourself in such a bind. For example, I have a truck driver they're hot shot, they can haul 15,000 pounds. That 15,000 pounds cannot be, super, I guess the word would be dense, right? It can't be like a 5x5 box that weighs 15,000 pounds. Number one, that probably hurt their trailer, but they would be overweight because they'd have too much weight in one position of their trailer. So that I have to make sure that 15,000 pounds is spread out over, at least 15 or 20 feet to be legal, right? Um, and I also got to make sure it's not going to be too tall on their trailer. I got to make sure it's not going to be too wide on their trailer. And so, but I mean, it's all sort. I mean, I could show you pictures on pictures and tell you all sorts of things we've hauled over the years, and you really don't know what you're getting into until you get there. That's the one thing we
Man.
know. And you got to be prepared, right? And you got to have drivers that know how to secure this stuff and know how to figure stuff out on a fly, right? Because we'll get in positions where we've spent 2 hours going to this load, and that person doesn't have the equipment they need to load us, or is having a hard time getting that equipment on our trailer. We have to, if we can help them any way we can, we need to, because if we don't get that load on the trailer, we can't haul it. We can't haul it. We don't make any money, you
Yeah.
know, and it kind of puts you in this tight situation sometimes.
The CDL versus non-CDL comment you made earlier in our conversation, where's the breakover point between I'm non-CDL to where now I'm required to go get a license and jump through all those hoops?
Yeah, for sure. So the way it works, it goes off of GVWR. I don't know if you ever heard GVWR before.
Yeah.
So
Gross
GVWR,
vehicle.
yeah, GVWR for people listening is gross vehicle weight rating. What that means, that's not what your equipment actually weighs. That's what it's rated to weigh. So if you open the door on your truck and you look, any truck, any vehicle, you'll look at the little VIN tag. It'll tell you GVWR. Basically, that means that's not what the truck actually weighs. What it means is if I am in the driver's seat and I have my friend in the passenger seat and I pile all my friends in the truck and I pile the bed with rocks, if I go on a scale and I weigh over that GVWR, I'm illegally operating that equipment.
Okay.
That is like the weight, the max weight that it can weigh. And so when I take a truck and I take a trailer, I actually combined their GVWR. So if my truck is 16,000 and my trailer is 10,000, my GVWR is 26,000. So that means truck, trailer, and load, I can't weigh over 26,000. The way they do a CDL, hopefully people can understand that. GVWR, it's a little hard to understand. And I have to, when I teach it to people more than once because it can be difficult. But the way they split a CDL is based off of that GVWR. If the equipment you are operating has a GVWR of 26,001 pounds or over, you have to have a CDL. If it has a GVWR of under 26,001 pounds, then you do not.
Wow. Pretty
So there
cool.
are trucks. I mean, there's like any piece of equipment is the same. So like if you have a dump truck, right? Maybe you want to start a dump truck company, but you want to be non-CDL. You have to make sure that truck isn't rated for over 26,001 pounds, which some of them are, some of them aren't. It really just depends. But um, you might say, well, my truck can haul. I got a big motor in my truck and it can haul 25,000 pounds. Like it's built for that. But if that exceeds what the GVWR says, um, then you're gonna be operating that equipment illegally. But even if your GVWR does cover that, if it's over 26,001 pounds and you don't have a CDL, you're operating that equipment illegally.
When you go through the process of getting a CDL, let's say that you're hot shotting and you're wanting to take the next step. Am I correct in that you're going to have to go get your CDL, which is it a written test and is there a physical component to it or you have to get a physical? And then what changes as far as do you have to set up an official business, an LLC, get insurance, all that good stuff?
Yeah. So the way it kind of works is, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of different ways to do it, right? When it comes to just being an owner operator or actually getting your own authority, like we'll talk about here in a second. But for example, here, right? So if you're a non CDL operator or a CDL operator, you're considered a commercial truck driver, right? You're a commercial operator. So that being said, you will have to take a pre-employment drug test, and you will have to get a DOT physical. Now, I believe DOT physicals, anybody who's commercially driving has to have a DOT physical, whether you're doing trucking or not. I'm pretty sure. And that's just a physical you go get. Now, if you're doing non CDL, that's pretty much where you stop. You don't have to be a part of like a random drug screening program. Um, you obviously don't have a CDL. That's kind of like the entry point for a non CDL operator. Now, if you're like starting your own company too, you need to get an LLC. If you're getting your own authority numbers, you need to go through the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration and file for your authority numbers. You need to get your trucking insurance. You're going to be every, for all sorts and purposes, you have a trucking company, whether you're doing non CDL or CDL. But you're going to go through all the different hoops to do non CDL hotshot that somebody that's doing CDL hotshot is going to, but you're going to be very limited on the freight that you can haul. And so that's why I kind of don't promote it as much. Now, the hoops that you don't have to jump through, for example, if somebody has a CDL, they have to be a part of a drug consortium, is what they call it. And really, what that is a random drug screening. So basically, for the guys who run for me, every quarter I get an email that tells me which one of my guys needs to go take a drug test. And that's based off them having a CDL. And so that's kind of a hoop that a non CL doesn't have to jump through. A couple other hoops they don't have to jump through. IFTA, International Fuel Tax Agreement. Don't know if you ever heard about that before. So,
No, I haven't heard of that one.
and I know I'm going through a lot here, so you can.
No, this is great. Please do.
I'm explaining everything here. So
Yeah,
IFTA,
do it, man. Throw it all out there.
yeah, International Fuel Tax Agreement. So this is something that affects trucking companies, uh, and what it is you might go. Let's say, for example, you live in Missouri. You fill up your semi truck in Missouri. Now you're probably not going to burn all that fuel in Missouri, right? But you're going to have enough fuel to be able to drive through Missouri, drive through uh, Illinois, even drive through Indiana, right? But because you filled all that fuel up in Missouri and you're not going to get any fuel in Illinois, Illinois doesn't get any of that fuel tax, right? What the IFTA does is at the end of every quarter, I send into my state all the miles I ran and every state I ran in. And they have a system that calculates how much actual fuel tax I owe to every state. So
Good
even though I
grief.
didn't fill up at all in Illinois, but I drove 2,000 miles, I owe them some fuel tax money. But it also equals out. So I might overpay in Missouri because I live here and drive here all the time and fill up here all the time. So I might overpay here because a lot of that tax I paid to Missouri should actually go to another state. But there are some states that have really high fuel taxes, like Illinois or New York or California, whatever the case may be. I might say, I don't want to fill up in Illinois because the fuel is so expensive, but I need to drive through Illinois a lot. They're going to get me on that fuel tax anyways when I do my IFTA. So
Okay.
hopefully, does that make sense?
It does. Is the reasoning behind that because you're using their roads and the wear and the tear, but
Exactly.
they're okay.
100%.
All right.
100% is what it is because, and it actually is a good system, right? Because, if you're just driving a normal truck, you're not going to have the fuel capacity in your truck to just drive through multiple states. But a semi truck, you do, right? You could go, full tank of in a semi truck can take you, 1,000 miles depending on how big your fuel tanks are, right? Or 1,200 miles. So you can pass through multiple states and never stop and get fuel there. You're putting a lot of wear and tear on the roads, and that's no bueno, right?
Yeah.
So when I was a non CDL hotshot company, right, and I only had non CDL trucks, I was not registered for IFTA um, because of how much the trucks weighed, right? And they do it based off of and let me see if I can make this easier to understand too, because with IFTA comes IRP, which is basically your commercial plates. IRP is the registration that your semi truck is going to have, and the IFTA and the IRP go hand in hand, and they go through your state. So if you don't have IRP, which is your commercial plates, so when I was doing non-CDL hotshot, I just ran, basic registration, basic plates, non-commercial. But when you get a semi truck, you can't run basic plates. I had to go through my state and get special plates for it. Once you get those special plates, then they know that you need to pay IFTA on the miles that you're running. So it plays out hand in hand, and that's a hoop that a non-CDL setup would not have to jump through.
The way stations that I see when I'm on Highway 44, driving back and forth between St. Louis and Springfield sometimes,
Yeah.
I never have figured out when you are required to pull over and get weighed. Is it by time or by distance, or you just have to do it a certain amount of times per
Yeah.
your
So,
route?
yeah, it's a good question. So the easy answer is you're always supposed to, but it gets a little harder. It gets a little more difficult than that. So the way that it works, the way stations are obviously ran by the state which you're in, right? They're state ran. So you have the Missouri Department of Transportation, the Illinois Department of Transportation, whatever the case may be. And they're ran by the state troopers. So you could say every state trooper is a DOT officer. So that's one thing too is like, a DOT officer, which is a state trooper, will pull you over and do a roadside inspection whenever they want. They don't have to have any sort of a reason. Obviously, you get pulled over by a normal police officer, they have a reason why they pulled you over. No, a DOT officer has the power to pull over any commercial hauler whenever they want. Number one, so they basically run the weigh stations and they work at the weigh stations. So the way that the weigh stations work is, you're going down the interstate, right, and you see a weigh station. Sometimes the weigh station will be closed. If the weigh station's closed, you don't have to pull in, or the weigh station might have a sign that says that like lights up and says pull in, or if they're backed up with trucks, they won't have more pull in, right? But there's also these third party companies called like Prepass that work with the weigh stations,
Okay,
and
I've
you can
seen those.
actually get this little Prepass module, like this little kind of like box in your truck, and that Prepass module is going to sense when you're close to a weigh station, and it will actually send your information to the weigh station, and they will actually select you to get pulled in or not pull you in.
Is it just random or is there a
No, it's
reason?
based off of different things, right? It could be that weigh station is set up right now to pull everybody in, but the weigh station can change their settings to where they only want 50% of the trucks pulled in. And then every trucking company has safety scores online. You can go online and look up any trucking company by their authority number, figure
Mhm.
out where they're from, how many trucks they have, what insurance they have, who owns the company. Like it's all public knowledge. You can figure out how many wrecks they've been in. You can figure out how many roadside inspections they've had, what issues they've had. So if you're having bad roadside inspections where you're failing them for whatever reason, that's going to lower your pre-pass rating. But if you're a company that's, having good roadside inspections, you don't have any accidents, then that's going to raise your pre-pass rating, meaning that you're going to actually be passed through weigh stations a lot more than somebody who doesn't have their stuff together. So that comes into play. But if you don't have that in your truck, if you don't sign up for it, and that's an open scale, you're supposed to pull in. And if you don't pull in, sometimes there'll be a state trooper sitting right on the other side that's going to race after you. And that's the very least probably a $450 ticket. He's probably going to give you a roadside inspection, and he's probably going to eat your lunch, basically, is the way I put it.
That's not going to be a good day.
It's not going to be a good time. And that goes for everybody, non CDL hotshots, CDL hotshots, commercial haulers in general. You're supposed to stop at weigh stations. Now, sometimes you'll see a sign that says no pickup trucks or no RVs or
Yeah,
no campers, for example. But if you're commercial hauling in any aspect, even like I believe that school buses, if you're a school bus driver, you're supposed to pull into a weigh station.
really. I
Yeah, I
didn't know
believe
that.
so. I don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure. I mean, it's an uh all encompassing station. Obviously semi trucks are what use it the most, but any
Yeah.
level of commercial hauler should stop.
Do they have these? Is there a certain pattern or every 100 miles or every 75 miles, or is it state by state, or is it just random how often you'll come across one?
It's definitely state by state,
Okay.
And I will tell you, the DOT, the Department of Transportation, is not created equal in every state. There are some states that are very, very vigorous and very on top of it, and are the states that you don't really want to go into. And then there are states that are a little bit more lax or don't have a lot of way stations. It varies state by state. I would say Arkansas, for example, is a very tough state when it comes to the DOT and with way stations. I don't have an issue with the DOT because there are a lot of companies that are just going out of their way to haul illegally. They're putting people at risk. They're not taking care of their equipment, you know,
Yeah.
and they are a nuisance and they are putting people at risk. But there are companies too that are really trying their best, you know. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong in semi trucking, and there's a lot of little things that can go wrong. Like you could have a marker light go out on your trailer, and you know if that's a crucial marker light, if the DOT deems it as crucial, they'll put you out of service. It's like a big deal, right? So there's a difference between like a semi truck having a little bit of electrical issue that they're dealing with and trying to fix, versus a guy who knows that he's severely overweight, hasn't changed his brakes in 5 years, and is
Yeah.
just trying to take it and been driving for the last 15 hours, and hopped up on Adderall, right? Like there's
Yeah.
a huge difference there. And
Well,
so,
trucking is a lot different. When I was a kid in the 70s and 80s, the drive all night, load up on no-dos and caffeine
yeah.
and just, drive 16 hours straight it was almost like a badge of honor from what I observed. But I think they've kind of gotten away from that, or at least legally, right? Don't you have is it 10 hours?
Yeah, so you have a 14-hour daily shift, right?
Okay.
And this is how it's been for a long time, but the big change has been electronic logs.
Oh,
So each one of my trucks has a device that's hooked up to the computer of the truck that registers how long they drive.
okay.
It's also a GPS. Like I could check it right now, see where everyone's at, see how long they have left. So the way it works is you have 14-hour shift a day. 11 hours of those 14 hours you can be actively driving. 3 hours is kind of like your on duty, not driving time. You're getting loaded, you're getting unloaded. Maybe you're needing to get an oil change, you're getting fuel, right? That's kind of what those other 3 hours are for. But you cannot go over 14 hours of basically working, or what the DOT would consider working, and you cannot drive more than 11 hours per day. And
And
that's
then
what, and the electronic logging device is what really controlling that. And that's what's stopping people from doing these crazy things. Now, if I went out and bought a 1999 truck or a glider kit like we talked about earlier, I don't have a computer, therefore I don't run electronic log. Therefore, I have to keep paper logs, and paper logs obviously are a lot easier to fudge around with and
sure.
mess with. But they're also a nuisance too of having to fill them out all the time, right? So I'd much rather run the electronic logs and keep it legal and not have any issues, in my opinion.
So you've got your 14 hours of work time, and then you have to be essentially downtime for 10 hours before you can basically start again the next day.
Yep. So you're off duty for 10 hours. And then like the logging device is recording all of this, right? So you get off duty, your truck doesn't move, and then you'll automatically get your hours the next day. After the end of a work week, you have to take what's called a 34-hour reset. And so what that is you have to be off duty for 34 hours. Basically, we do them on the weekends because there's no place to really drop off on the weekends. And basically, just a truck driver sitting at a truck stop if he's not home for 34 hours.
Ooh.
And then
Well,
you get all your time back for the next week.
if it's a nice truck stop, some of them are pretty slick.
Yeah, no, there's some real nice ones. It really depends on where you're at.
Yeah.
You go down to Joplin, right? You're in Springfield, so go down to Joplin. You got like the travel centers down there, and but there's also what's called personal convenience, which is a little bit more. It's easy to understand, but kind of hard to use because really personal convenience is it makes it so you can move your truck when you're off duty. So that's one benefit of doing HotShot is, you have like an F-350 that you can unhook your trailer and you can get that F-350 into basically anywhere, right? Any fast food joint,
Sure.
park it anywhere. So that's a blessing, right? And like maybe you're off duty, you want to go get food, or you want to go down to the beach, you're over in California or whatever, you can do personal convenience and drive over there. But, just because you are doing PC time doesn't mean that a DOT officer is going to look at that and view it the same way you do. Like we've had trouble where, my guy was going to go get a haircut the DOT officer didn't believe them. They were checking our logs, and we got in trouble for it. Right?
Hmm.
It's like, so I don't use it that much, and because there are people that abuse the system, right? And
Yeah.
they're using that to get further along in their load, or using PC to be able to deliver a load on time, whatever the case may be. Um, and so the DOT is trying to crack down on that.
Do most folks that get into hot shotting eventually go to a full size semi truck, or do you have a whole mix of people that stay hot shotting because it fits what they're wanting to do, or they just go right to semi truck, or
I
how's
think
that
it's
kind of play?
definitely 50-50.
Okay.
There's some guys who have been in a semi truck for a while and want to like downgrade and like be able to just travel more, and they want a truck that they can like I said, take the trailer off of.
Hmm.
And they want to do it that way, or they want to get into, maybe they've been pulling a dry van and they want to get into doing some flatbed stuff or step deck. Like, I mean, the gooseneck I would consider kind of between a flatbed and a step deck, right? When we look at a gooseneck trailer, and they want to start with that. They just want to get out of the semi world and want to get into the hotshot world. Most of the time, though, I would say it's people that are entering trucking that need a lower point of entry,
Okay.
because a hotshot truck, obviously, it's shorter. It's shorter in length usually, not all the time. Sometimes it can be just as long as a semi truck, but it's a little bit easier to maneuver. It's easier to buy the equipment, right? I mean, you can buy a
Hmm.
gooseneck trailer and a truck from just a farmer locally. Get the truck from a Ford dealership than it is to go buy a semi truck like we talked about in a brand new flatbed or step deck or a used one, right? It's harder to get money from the bank on that equipment.
It's
Now,
I can see it being intimidating too to just step right up into a semi truck if you're not used to driving such a large vehicle on the highway. You don't
for sure.
have much forgiveness on either side.
Oh yeah, it definitely can be it definitely can be. So, and that's kind of, some people start with a hot shot. The problem with hot shot, the biggest issue I've seen is that truck you're buying and that trailer you're buying, they were not intended to, or they weren't built to do what you're doing with it, right?
Oh, the high
Like,
mileage.
obviously, you get a diesel dually truck, it has a tow haul mode,
Mhm.
but Ford did not design that truck to be pulling 20,000 pounds every single day of its life, right?
Right.
And those motors, even if you take super good care of them, like that truck only has about 300,000 miles, give or take, and that's pushing it. Now you add the fact that you have this high level of stress on the truck all the time. I mean, you might only get 150 or 200,000 miles out of that transmission, or maybe even less. And when you're commercially hauling, over the road OTR, you're doing at least 100,000 miles a year, and that's like the lower end. So you only have about 2 years with that truck, 3 years if you're lucky, and you're kinda just hoping that you've made enough money to then buy another truck.
Hmm.
But with a semi, those semis are built to go a million miles. If you buy a brand new semi, you have probably 7, at least 7 good years with that truck. Obviously, you're gonna put money into it, stuff's gonna break, you gotta fix it, but you're
Mhm.
hoping to get at least 7 years out of that truck. And so, the semi is a lot better, especially in a hard, economy for trucking, because you have so many years with it compared to this hot shot. I got to keep running this hot shot because I pay expensive insurance, but the rates aren't that good, and I'm not saving up money to then buy another truck. So I've seen many, many times where people are at the end of life when it comes to their hot shot truck, and they just do not have the money to buy another truck, and it's difficult.
What is the education as far as, let's say that someone wants to, they're either in hot shotting and they want to move up to a semi truck, or they've just decided I want to drive OTR. Where can they get training? I mean, I'm sure I've seen them at the local community colleges, but I don't
Yeah.
know how in depth they are, how long that takes, and then maybe if you know what that might ballpark cost.
Oh, for sure. So I do some consultation, and I have a lot of people that reach out to me and ask me, I want to get started. This is what I want to do. What's your honest opinion, right? And it really depends where someone's at. If you're somebody who has had your CDL and you have, experience already and you want to get into hotshot, and buy equipment, I say more power to you, right? But a lot of times what you see is somebody who is wanting to get into non-CDL hotshot and doesn't have any driving experience, or they just got their CDL and they want to get on the road. They don't have any experience, or they want to get their CDL like we're saying right now, and they want to do HotShot afterwards. Now, the way they do it now is back, I believe it was 2019 when the law changed. I could be wrong. I honestly don't remember exactly when the law changed. It might have been a little bit later. Now you have to go to school. You have to go to a driving school now. Before you could take the test and you could log the hours and you would be good. You get your CDL. Now you have to go to a school, and a school usually costs anywhere from $5,000 to $6,000 on the higher end and like the normal end. But sometimes you can find one locally in a small town and you get $2,500. They'll push you through it, whatever the case may be. So what I tell a lot of companies, but the thing is too, you got to think about this. Insurance requirements are getting so crazy where with my company, I can't hire anybody that doesn't have less than 2 years of, or doesn't have more. If somebody has less than 2 years of experience commercially driving, I cannot hire them. My insurance will not insure them. And even if I had an insurance company that would, most likely their rates are going to be really crazy. And so I tell everybody to go through school and then get hired on to like one of the big trucking companies, because these big trucking companies, they are self-insured. And so
Okay.
they have so much, they have whether a huge surety bond or they have so much money put back to where they can actually provide their own insurance. So they are really the only companies that can hire these brand new drivers and afford it. Uh,
Okay.
and this is kind of what's hurting the small trucking community and small trucking companies is like these drivers, I just can't hire them. If a guy came to me and said, "Hey, I'm fresh out of school, just got my CDL. I want to work for you. I have a lot of experience outside of before I got my CDL, whatever the case may be. I've worked on the farm, I've hauled all sorts of stuff forever. It's like, that's great, man, but I cannot hire you. My insurance will not insure you." And so it kind of causes an issue because it limits these smaller trucking companies who they can hire, but also gives huge benefits to these big companies to pay whatever they want to pay because they know these drivers can't get jobs anywhere else.
Yeah, that
But I
stinks.
still I still invite somebody. I still say, "Hey, it would be very beneficial for you because if you're not in trucking, you don't know how trucking is, and you might get into something and you might hate it, Might be
Yeah,
something might be way different than what you thought. And if you're went out and got your own authority, you went out and bought your own truck and you're deep, deep in it, you're in a difficult situation. But you
sure.
can go and, sign a 1 year contract with a major trucking company. They'll pay for your school. You could put a 1 year in with them. You're not going to make a ton of money. You probably make 40,000, 45,000 that year. But the experience you're going to get and you get your school paid for, then you're like, I actually want to dive into this deep. Then you go into a different company, or then you go and try and buy your own truck, or then you find a small company that can help you out. Because that's what we need. We need good qualified drivers. That's what companies need. Uh, but like we're limited by experience, right? When it comes to insurance.
How long does the training, when they put you through that school, is that usually tied in with a community college, or are they typically their own separate thing? And then how long does that usually take?
There's a lot of community colleges that offer the training.
Okay.
Like Crowder College down in Joplin does it, but usually there'll be third party companies that offer the training too. Like there's one local to where I live. And it really depends. I can't remember the exact hours, so don't quote me on that, but it depends on what what you're getting, right? So you can do an automatic only like trucking course that just teaches you how to drive an automatic semi truck, right? And you put the hours in on that, and that takes less hours than a manual trucking course. But you'd have an automatic restriction on your license, and I believe the automatic is about 140 hours that you have to put in.
Okay.
Um, but it's usually about a 6 week course, give or
I'm
take 5 weeks.
surprised. I'm surprised there's even manual trucks out there with the move to automatics and pretty much everything.
Well, people love the manual trucks though. And I think manual trucks will be around for a long time, I believe, especially if you're doing more heavy haul and you're doing more
In the
of like kind
mountains.
of kind of the step deck and flatbed type of stuff. I see more manual trucks in that than I do in just pull and drive in, right? But you don't want these restrictions on your license. If you're gonna go through the course, you want to have the least amount of restrictions. If a guy can actually go through the course with a diesel dually truck, and get his CDL as a commercial driver, but he's going to have, an automatic restriction, and he's also going to have an air brake restriction, and you can't drive a semi truck at all with an air brake. What I say? restriction. Yeah, with an air brake restriction, you cannot drive a semi truck, right? So if you're going through this course, you want to be able to do it on a manual. To be able to drive a manual, you want to be able to um, not have the air brake restriction on. And there's also all sorts of different things you can get for your CDL, like be able to haul hazmat. You have to go through a separate course for that.
Oh.
To do triples or doubles, right? Like you'll see the FedEx pulling multiple trailers.
Mm-hmm.
That's another course you go through and you get that on your license. So all of these little things though is going to add up in your ability to get a good paying driving job. And so I'm all about do it once, do it right, and get it all done.
So you had mentioned a bit ago that when you go and work for, you've got your CDL and you're working for one of these large companies that are self-insured, 40 to 50,000 is ballpark what you might make. Um, how how much does that change when you've got, let's say, 4 or 5 years of experience on, maybe you're still working for a company, but it's a different company that can insure you now that you have the time, or you've bought your own truck and now you're kind of your own owner operator.
Yeah, I mean it can be all sorts of numbers, obviously, but the two ways that truck drivers are usually paid, they're going to be paid if you're an over the road truck driver, right? They're all other sorts. I mean, you could be a local truck driver getting paid hourly, right? $40 an hour, $35 an hour.
Okay.
But a lot of times, what it is you're going to get paid percentage of the load, or you're going to get paid per mile. Now, I lean more towards percentage of the load. I think that's a better way to get paid. A lot of guys who start out, maybe you're leasing you're joining a company like my company. You're an established driver, we're an established company. Usually I'd start somebody out at about 25% of gross. Like so if
Okay.
that load pays $1,000, they get paid $250. That's like starting out pay, right?
Okay.
As they're with me longer, it might go up to even up to 30% of gross. So for example here, just to run some easy numbers, just to kind of look at this from here. Um, if if a truck grosses $6,000 in a week, which I think for like a flatbed or step deck, that's pretty average. The driver would get paid if he's making 25%, he'd get paid $1,500. So that's like an average okay week at 25%. You're making what $6,000 a month.
Does that factor in fuel and things, or is that your
They're just a
profit?
driver, right? They're just
Oh,
driving.
okay.
So
All
they
right.
don't pay any if you're just a driver,
Got
you're
it.
not paying any
Got it.
expenses. And that's kinda
Okay.
like I would say for a guy who has experience, that's like gonna be his next step after like a huge trucking company. So
Okay.
he's gonna go from like making, 40,000 a year to making maybe 65 or 70, hopefully, right?
Okay.
But also if the truck's down, if you have a bad week,
Hmm.
all that comes into play. But you'll have guys too that are paid, per mile. They don't care how much the load pays, which can be a benefit to them. And they're doing, let's say you're getting paid 70 cents a mile, which I think is pretty average there, or 65 cents a mile maybe, and you times that by doing, let's say 2,200 miles a week. That's about $1,550 a week. So
Okay.
so I would say your next step after a huge trucking company is going to be making probably 60 or $70,000 a year. Now, if you're going to get into more specialized hauling, so like hauling really heavy stuff or oversized loads or being a specialized hauler, that's where you see truck drivers making more 80, 90, 100,000 a year, even more than that, right? If you're very specialized. Um, when you want to go your own route and you want to get your own truck, and you want to get your own authority and you want to do that, obviously you're a business owner at that point and you're driving for yourself. Usually, what business owners will do is they'll pay themselves a normal driving wage. So, like what I talked about right here, and then they'll take the profits off the top. If your company's operating really good and you're paying yourself a normal driving wage, and you're actually making money as a company, which lots of trucking companies don't make money. It's very easy to not make money trucking, even though you're grossing so much money. You can usually take an extra $2,000 or $3,000 probably a month on top of your own take home pay. So instead of making $6,000 that month, you might be making $9,000 that month.
Hmm.
But your truck could break down and you can make no money at all. So I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's all I'm and like I know I threw a lot of numbers, but it's all over the board, right?
Sure.
Um, It's very easy. Trucking, this is what people see. People see a high gross number, right? You think about a service based business. I actually have a little pest control company. You know, a pest control company, service based business, let's say a small pest control company makes five or $6,000 a month, and that's kind of service based. They do $55,000 gross a year. An entry level trucking company, if you go out and buy your truck, get your authority, get on the road, that truck should gross at least $20,000 to $22,000 a month. But the cost to make that 22 grand is a lot more expensive than the cost to make that 6 grand in pest control, right? But people see the numbers and they say, oh, I have my second year trucking company. I have 5 trucks on the road and we just did $900,000 in revenue this year or $1 million in revenue. Somebody's like, oh, you have a company that has $1 million in revenue? That's a big company. The trucking world, it's not that big of a company, number one. And they're also not telling you how much money they spent to make that million. They might have spent 980,000 to make that million.
Shoo.
And it's the margins are very close, but people see the numbers, right? And they're like, oh, I can make so much money. And it's like, yeah, on paper the numbers look good, but if you really knew the behind the scenes, this company actually lost money, or this company's very like the margins are very, very, very close.
It's all
Um,
relative. Yeah.
yeah, and it's like you could have a service based business at home that does 100 grand a year, and you could profit more doing that than you could at $1 million trucking company.
There are a lot of expenses. You certainly have to plan ahead to set aside a portion of all of your profits for replacing tires. If your transmission goes out, what's that going to be? 10 grand to fix your transmission? Oil change. How much is an oil change?
About
$300?
500,
I
depending.
was going to say, I
Yeah.
don't know how many. That's when you're measuring oil by the gallon as opposed to the quart. It's everything is going to cost more, but it's just on a larger scale.
And that's what it comes down to a lot of times is your cost per mile.
Hmm.
What people will call it, right? I need to know what my rate per mile needs to be, and I need to know how much it costs me to move my truck a mile, right? Like I need to understand that my rate per mile's, $3 a mile. That's what I need to get paid. My cost per mile might be $2.20 a mile, so I'm only profiting about 80 cents a mile, and I think that's not terrible if you can profit 80 cents a mile doing 10,000 miles a month, right? But yeah, it's like anything can happen at any time, right? Like for example, in January, my semi truck blew its clutch,
Hmm.
and that right there is $7,000.
Shoot.
And it takes just that it happens instantly, right? And it's like if you don't have that money in the bank, you don't have that money. Like there's really not much you can fix on a semi truck if you're on the road. That isn't going to cost you a grand by the end of
Really?
it. Because you're talking like, let's say I have a driver on the road and he blows a tire. We need a roadside service to fix our tire. I mean, that's $700, $800 every time. And then if the truck's down for a day, I'm gonna buy him a hotel and I'm gonna pay him for the day because he's like off the road, and I also gotta get the truck fixed. And so it's like the expenses are so crazy high that you have like people get into the trucking, they see the numbers like I said, and they just go after it. And I was like that too when I first started. But once you get into it, you realize, oh, I can be underwater so very quick. I have to build a system that is going to profit. And that's what I help people do now is I help companies build systems that profit because there are so many different, scenarios I've been in. And I mean, we could talk hours and hours about all the different scenarios I've been in that I would have never thought that I would be there. And it's like figuring out how to get through that, and then changing the system to be like, okay, this is a possibility, uh, to cover my butt in that case again and then add on and make my system better, right? And so it's like there are just so many things that are going to happen to you as a trucker, as a driver, as a business owner in the trucking industry that there's just that there's impossible to prepare for, I think is the word.
Yeah.
But once you have the knowledge, and you can like get yourself somewhat ready for it, it's not as big a deal.
Yeah. It
But yeah,
doesn't push you
it's
back on your heels as bad if you're kinda
yeah,
anticipating things.
you anticipate it and and then you get through it, and I'm 28. I started the company when I was 24. And I remember things that would occur, back then that I thought were huge deals. And now I'm like, that wasn't a problem at all. Like, I'm like, I've gone through so much more that was worse than that. It's like, that was easy. And but that's how it is, right? You look back and you think, it wasn't that bad. Now you have a way higher stress tolerance, and it's easier, in general. But and as you build your company more, there's a lot more liability, right? Like you might have 6 trucks grossing a lot of money, but now your insurance payment goes from, when you have one truck, it was $1,500 a month. Now your insurance payment's, $9,000 a month, right?
Shoo.
Or $12,000 a month. But then your down payment on your insurance is 20% of your total policy that you got to pay once a year, and that's $25,000, right? And it's like you kind of hope that their trucks are running good and nothing's breaking down, and you have that money in the bank to be able to do it. And you got to be prepared. Anything can happen all the time. You got to be prepared.
What would you say that you like most about your job? What's the thing that gets you up out of bed every day?
Um, I would say so. I have a love hate relationship with trucking. I would say, I love it and I hate it. But I think what I like the most is just being able to see the experience applied to the process. Meaning, the system that's been built, and like thinking back, of what I went through to get here and like what had to be done to get it here, and the people that helped me and the people that are around me and the people I was able to help. That makes it all worth it to be like, you make a lot of missteps to get here and a lot of things work out the way they should. But you look back and you think, I applied a good portion of my life to this, and this is what I have for it, a physical, tangible, something you can grab, you know. Now you might hate that or you might love that, and you might look back and say I wasted my time. But all of the experience and knowledge that you have, everybody wants to be able to go back and say, if I would do it different, if I knew this, right? And it's like I think, I'm like, oh, if I just, had the knowledge I had now and went back to when I was 24, I would do it completely different. And it's like, but all of that struggle that you went through over the last 4 years is the only reason that you have that knowledge to begin with.
Yeah.
And, it's growth. I've had so much growth from the company in general, whether, I'm going to be in trucking for the rest of my life, or whether I'll sell the company, or whether I'll move over to just doing more consulting, or whatever the case may be, just the growth I had and just the stress meters that I was able to push in myself and put myself in tough positions and work out of it. And you learn so much about yourself too. It's like you'll be put in position where you're like, what decision am I going to make? Or how am I going to handle this? And you learn a lot about yourself in those situations.
When you
And I
see
value that a lot.
when you see a driver that comes in, or if you look at guys that have been successful that you've been around, they either work for you or with you or you just know in the industry, what are the kind of skills, soft skills is what I typically call them, that the guys that are successful have that the ones that aren't don't?
I'll say the number one thing is you need to figure it out. That is probably the number, like when you're driving, especially as a driver on the road, a successful driver is going to be able to get themselves out of tight positions. Whether that's, something breaking down on the truck, whether that's, a load that is a hard load to haul, whether that's, equipment breaking or whatever the case may be. If you want to be a successful driver, you need to be able to think on your feet, and you need to be able to take control of a situation. Because one thing with trucking is there's a lot of people trying to dig their hands in your pockets. And if you're a driver on the road, there's going to be a lot of companies, whether it's a brokerage or whether it's a customer, they're going to try and take advantage of you, right? Or whether it's a mechanic or whatever the case may be. And you need to be able to put your foot down. You need to be able to take advantage of the situation, or not advantage, but take control of the situation. And you need to be able to, number one, stick up for yourselves, but number two, gain the knowledge necessary to put yourself in a better situation the next time. And I think trucking, that's what it is. You're consistently gaining knowledge. You're consistently making connections. You're consistently finding people you can trust and people you can work with. If you're somebody who, I guess what I'm trying to say here is, you can't truck alone, right? It takes a team. Whether that's a great dispatcher, or whether it's a great factoring company or a great fuel card or a great business owner, whatever the case may be, like all of that comes into play. And as a driver or as a business owner, you need to be able to find those people, create good environments with those people, create good friendships with those people, and work together to be successful. You definitely can't do it alone.
What's next for for Jason, where do you think you're going to go? Where are you going to be in 5 years? You're going to have a much larger trucking empire, or
Yeah. So actually now, so really what I'm focusing on now, um, trucking's been the last 5 years, and it's been a really good time. And I don't think the trucking company's going anywhere, but I'm also not building it up. I used to be just all sort of like having the biggest trucking company. I would
hmm
drive by CFI. I don't know if you know CFI, but they're down in Joplin. They're a huge
yep,
trucking company. You got Prime in Springfield, right? Drive by
hmm
Prime,
yep.
and I would say I want to be as big as Prime one day, and that was what it was. But recently, I like I talked about before, I was Mormon for a little bit, and I left the church and kind of rekindled my connection to God and rekindled my connection to Jesus Christ. And I currently am a full time preacher as
Oh,
well.
okay.
And so that's kind of I came to the position I was like, well, I can dedicate my whole entirety of myself to business, right? And I can get after it and I can be successful. I've seen that. But truly, what is more important, right? Where do I want to do I just wanna be, have a huge trucking company and be stressed out all the time and not be able to see my family because 'cause I'm busy all the time, and, I might have a lot of money in the bank, but really what does it matter? Or can I dedicate myself to something that's, in my opinion, a lot more important, have a lot more time for my family, and make what I consider a positive change for people around me, for my family in general, for my friends. And so I'm a full-time preacher now, and like I said, I do have a small pest control company that I'm putting a little bit more work into now. But in the next 5 years, I want to be happy, my friend. I want to be, in a house with my wife, hopefully, God willing, a beautiful child. I want to be content with what I have. Um, and if we have a bigger trucking company, then we might. If we have a big pest control company, then we might. If we don't have any of it, then as long as I have my faith in Christ, I think I'll be completely okay.
You got a lot of irons in the fire, but I think you've arranged them well. So,
Well, it took a lot to it took a lot of failure, and it took a
yeah.
lot of learning, and it took a lot of progression to have the knowledge I have today to be able to apply it effectively to what I'm working on. And that still doesn't mean that my wife doesn't have to put me on my place and tell me to slow down and calm down. And I think
They're
having
good
that
like
person in
that.
your life, whether it's a good friend or your wife or
Yeah.
girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever the case may be, wherever you're at, is important because I've always had since I was a kid that, opportunist mindset, and it has helped me a lot, but it's also hurt me a lot. And so having somebody to just kind of slow you down and say, "Hey, think about this. Think about what we've gone through already. How can we do this better? How can we learn from that?" It's invaluable. Invaluable.
If someone wanted to get hold of you for your pest control services or for your trucking services or your YouTube channel, where can they find you?
Yeah, so most of my information there is on YouTube. Find me on Facebook at Jason Love. I would say my Facebook's probably the best. You can email me. Email me at jlove, JLOVE, at Salem, SALEMCOC.net. That's my email, jlove at salemcoc.net. I'll definitely reply to you there. But drop a comment on one of my YouTube videos. I'll definitely get back to you. But that'd probably be the easiest way to reach me.
Okay. Thanks for your time, man. I really appreciate it. A lot of good information about trucking. I didn't know much about, but now I know a way more. So,
Now you're ready to start a company, my friend.
well, I got two irons in the fire, and that is enough. So,
That's enough, brother. That's enough. It
but
was good
all
talking
right,
to you. Thank you for having me.
you bet. Have a great day.
You as well, brother. Bye bye. Yeah, I'm here.
And that wraps up another episode of the Jobs Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. Hopefully, you found that interesting. As always, I wait until the end of an interview to ask you to like, subscribe, and share. I feel it's important that I earn that support from you. Thanks again, and we will see you on the next one.